I'm picking up a signal from my family in space. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Woohoo! It's everybody's favorite day of the week, the day where a girl with screws in her head talks incessantly for 20 minutes. If you're new here and you like pointy objects and torture treatments from the medieval ages, then you've come to the right place. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. In last week's video, we talked about coping with making big medical decisions. And if you haven't seen that video, then I will link it in the description so that you can go and check it out. Today we are going to get right into it and talk about this wonderful device that I have screwed into my head. We are also going to answer the question that everybody wants to know: what is halo traction? So before I get into kind of what it was like getting the halo on and the traction treatment, I thought that I should make a distinction here between regular halo traction and halo gravity traction. Halo traction is basically used for people who have either broken or fractured their necks, and in a lot of the cases it's used to kind of decompress the vertebrae. So for that kind of traction, people wear a collar and there are bars going down from the halo, and it kind of sits on their shoulders and stretches their neck up. Obviously, I am not going through that kind of traction, but that kind of traction is pretty common, especially if there's an injury involved. What I am going through, however, is halo gravity traction, and this form of traction is used to help straighten out scoliosis curvatures. Before I get into talking about the treatment itself for halo traction, I want to talk about how the halo goes on. And I think that this is a really important piece because there's not a whole lot of perspective from a person who's already been through it online. And so when I was kind of looking up what this whole process was going to be like, the getting the halo on was missing, and that's really a big part of this whole treatment. There is one thing that I want to point out before I continue though, and that is that due to my condition and just past life experiences, I am a little bit more sensitive to pain than the average person. I actually am a lot sensitive to pain, so I do not have a very grand pain tolerance. I'd say it's quite low, maybe the lowest that there is. So from my perspective, knowing that I have a low pain tolerance, the experience of getting the halo on was probably different for me than it would be for other people. So that's just something to keep in mind before I continue and talk about how the halo goes on. The other thing I want to point out is that for kids, as far as I know, they knock them out, they put them to sleep to put the halo on. As far as I know, that's the way it is, but for adults, they do not. They keep you awake, and they just use local freezing to put the halo on. So, getting the halo on, I don't have anything good to say about it, really. It was a very traumatic experience for me in a lot of different ways, and I honestly, I can't even sugarcoat it because it's just not pleasant. I mean, when you think about it, you're getting screws drilled into your, well, they don't drill them, they turn them into your head. but it's not a pleasant thing. They might do it differently in other locations, but at least for me, this is what happened. I came in here on my first day and got admitted into the hospital, and they gave me a room, and I got all set up in the room, and then they got me to lay down on my hospital bed to start the procedure of putting the halo on. So they have all of their instruments ready, and basically what they do is they pick out a size of halo. So the black piece of this is the halo. So they pick out a size, and that entirely depends on your head shape and your head size. For me, I'm wearing a small. So they measure that out, and then the first thing that they do is they put the halo over your forehead, and then what they do is they stick kind of this, it's like a screw, but instead of it being sharp on the end, it's got just a pad, and basically all that does is they turn it down so that it's tight on your forehead, and that keeps the halo in place for when they start putting the actual screws in. After they line up the halo, what they do is they shave a little bit of hair kind of behind your ears or along your scalp line. It's not, they don't take off a lot of hair. It's just enough to get the screws in the place that they need them. And the amount of screws that you get in the back of your head kind of depends on the structure of your bone and the shape of your head. For me, I only have the one set of screws in the back of my head, but I've seen where they've had to put two sets in the back. The next step in the process is getting the local freezing put in. Now, when I first started to look into this part of it, I was told by the doctors here that the freezing would be the worst part of it, and I have to dispute that because it is not even close to being the worst part. So basically what they do is they take a needle, it's pretty small with the freezing, and they will put it into both spots in the back of your head and then in your forehead. It's not pleasant to have them go in because it has to go in through your skin and into the first layer of bone. But the good thing is, once they start to inject the freezing in, the pain stops immediately. So it's really only a couple seconds of burning before the freezing actually takes effect and you don't feel it anymore. Now, had the freezing actually taken with me, I probably would be describing this in a different light, but unfortunately, when they put in the freezing in my forehead, it did not work. So with the back screws going in, I didn't feel it, but with the front screws going in, I felt it all, and that just changed the mood completely because it was quite a lot more pain than I was expecting. It's honestly one of the most excruciating things I've ever experienced, and it was quite traumatic. I'm not gonna lie. So I thought that the way they put the screws in is that they kind of cut the skin first and then stick the screw in, but that's not actually how they do it. So the screws have they have a razor sharp point on the end of them, and like I described before, the halo's being held in with the fake screws. So they go in, there's holes in the front of the halo, and they put the screw in, and basically they just turn it. And it goes into your skin, and they just turn it into your skull. It does actually go into the first layer of skull. And the way that they know how far to go in is they use something called a torque wrench. and that you can set it to push something in at a certain amount of pressure, and they put these screws in at 8 pounds of pressure. So the torque wrench helps them know how far to put the screws in. So with the back screws going in, like I said, the freezing worked with the back screws, so I didn't feel them going into my skin. But the first thing that you experience is an instantaneous change in pressure in your head. So every time that they turn the screw, you may not feel the screw itself turning, but the pressure as they turn the screw increases. Um, it's not a comfortable thing. It felt like, well, it felt like my head was in a vice. It feels like your head is literally going to explode. The pressure just builds and builds and builds, and it gets to a certain point where they're done, but the pressure remains the same. So I wouldn't necessarily describe the back ones going in as painful. The pressure was painful, but it's not a typical kind of pain. I wouldn't, I don't even know if I could categorize it as a pain. It's very hard to adjust to, and I don't know, it might be more mental than physical, but the pressure itself is very intense. So back screws, not really painful, just really intense pressure. The front screws, like I said, because the freezing didn't take, I could actually feel the screw going into the skin on my forehead, and that is excruciating. I can't use any words to describe the amount of pain that caused. Fortunately, freezing usually takes with people. There are some people that freezing just doesn't work with. It's the same in the dental chair. Some people just don't respond to freezing. But I mean, it was the front screws going in, it was excruciating. I can't describe it as anything else. So once the screws are in, what they do is there's a little nut in front of the screw, and you might be able to see it. It's right up against the halo. So they have to put that on, and they kind of have to torque it down, and that holds the screw in place so that it's not going to move, because it is kind of just, it's not in your skull, it's just kind of sitting on top of your skull with like the pointiest part is just kind of just the tiniest bit in your skull. So the screws, if they are pulled hard enough, they do actually have the ability to slide. So that's why the nuts are there, they kind of hold them in place. And then after that they put, we call it the tent, but it's basically just that piece that's connected to the hook, and they basically just screw that in as well, and then the process is done. So for me, because we had complications, it took a lot longer. I think it was probably about 2 hours total, but I've heard them say that they can get it done in 20 minutes to half an hour for other people. So I guess it depends on, you know, what your pain tolerance is and how you react to what's happening, and that will affect the amount of time that it takes for the procedure to be done. They had said that once the screws were in, about 5 or 10 minutes later, the pressure would relieve itself, and it should be less uncomfortable. I have to dispute that again. The pressure does relieve after 5 minutes, but it's a very minuscule amount. The pressure stayed for at least 2 days. And it's very uncomfortable, and it's just, I mean, it's foreign, and you have to get used to the feeling of the halo being in your skull. So I would say that the pressure remains for probably 2 to 3 days. The other thing is that the sites, obviously where the pins are in, so around the skin, is very sensitive. So anytime that you hit the halo or bump the halo in the first little bit, it can be excruciating. I remember hitting it a couple times, and just it's like a brain freeze and a really bad toothache all mixed into one times 10. It's not pleasant when you hit the halo in the first week. The pain from the screw sites and just the sensitivity that you feel, it will go away. For me, it went away within a week, and then it just kind of becomes this extension of your body. And it is true, you do actually get used to wearing it, and you don't really, after a while, you just don't notice it. But it's different for everybody. I wouldn't say that it goes away immediately. Like I said, for me, it took about a week to actually adjust to having the halo in. And then obviously the screws have to be cleaned, or the skin around the screws has to be cleaned. So what they do is they come and they soak a Q-tip with saline, which is just basically salt water, and they just kind of very gently rub around the screw site. It's not painful. The saline kind of, I wouldn't say it burns, it kind of tingles. It's not uncomfortable, it's not bad at all, but that happens daily after the halo goes in. Now for me, 2 days after the halo went in, they came back to tighten the screws. And I say screw tightening, but it's not really a tightening because the screws aren't going in any further than they are. What they do is they just make sure that they are remaining at the same 8 pounds of pressure. So again, they use that little torque wrench that I was talking about before, and what they do is they loosen off the nut around the halo, and then they stick the torque wrench at the end of the screw, so there's kind of an indentation in the screw that they stick that into. And then they set the torque wrench for 4 pounds, and they turn it, or they turn the torque wrench, and it just kind of sends this vibration through the screw. Now, the first 2 times that this happened, it was pretty painful. It's just mainly the skin, because if the screw does turn a little bit, which it probably will, then the skin is obviously going to be irritated. There aren't any nerve endings in your skull, so you're not feeling it there. What you're feeling is the skin around it reacting to the screw, or even just the vibration. So it is painful, I'm not going to lie. It gets better after the first couple times. So they do 4 pounds of pressure, and then they do it on all 4 of them, and they will kind of alternate which ones they do. And then they switch it to 6 pounds of pressure, and they do it again, 7 pounds, and then finally 8 pounds. So 4 times they torque the screw. And then on the last time, they tighten down the nut again, and that's it. So the whole process, if you react well and you're not in too much pain, it will take less than 5 minutes. It's very quick. And for me, the first couple times, I took codeine and a couple other just pain relieving medications to help with the pain afterwards, because it does kind of put that pressure, that initial pressure, back into your head. It doesn't last long, maybe an hour or so, but it does bring back that pressure, and then it will relieve after a little bit. So in the first week, you can expect to be going through some pain, and I'm not gonna lie, it's not a comfortable pain. It's not a mosquito bite like the guy said who was tightening my screws. It does not feel good. It's something that you will definitely have to adjust to if you go through it. Is it as bad as getting the screws put in? No, not unless the screw is particularly loose. The screws can loosen in a bunch of different ways. It depends on if you hit your head a lot. It can depend on your bone structure itself. They explain that there's a couple different ways that a screw can be loosened. If it has a big impact, then it can loosen off. It's not going to fall out because the nut is holding it in place. But I did experience a couple tightenings where they've been considerably more loose than some of the other ones. And to get them torqued down again can be more painful than the ones that are not loose, which would make sense. But so don't always expect that the screws are going to stay in the same spot, because they will likely turn. Whether they just turn a little bit or they turn a lot just kind of depends. Because I guess I have good bone structure, I only get the screws tightened every 2 weeks. Again, that kind of depends, and I'm not sure what they do for kids, whether or not they tighten them more often. But for an adult, the halo gets tightened every 2 weeks. So to summarize the whole experience, I would say that if you have a low pain tolerance, or if the person that you know who is going to be going through this has a low pain tolerance, I would strongly recommend sedation if you're an adult and you're going through getting a halo put on, because it can be pretty bad for you emotionally. For me, I did ask for sedation. I warned them beforehand that I didn't have a great pain tolerance, and they just kind of ended up saying that that's how it's done for adults, and that, everything would be fine and it wasn't that bad. But in my experience, it can be pretty traumatic. So if you do have a low pain tolerance, I would recommend pushing for some form of sedation, or just something to relax you, even just to help you get through the process. And I don't know, if you have a high pain tolerance, maybe it goes super quick, like in 20 or 30 minutes, and you don't feel any of the things that I described. But I definitely think that you need to remember that everybody's different. So if they tell you that it's a certain way, you can listen to that, but keep in your mind that you're a different person than everybody else, and you might react differently. I still use painkillers to help me get through a screw tightening, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. If that's what you need to help you get through the tightenings, or to help you get the halo put on, there's no shame in that, because it just helps you have a better experience, and it builds a foundation for the whole course of the treatment. And if you end up having a traumatic experience right at the beginning, like I did, then it makes the rest of the experience really difficult to continue with. So honestly, there is no shame in saying that you need to have something to help you through the process. If that's what you need, then that's what you need. And advocate for that, because you know yourself best and you really need to make sure that you're getting what you need to make your treatment as successful as possible. So I'm going to end the video here because next week or at some point soon I'm going to be making another video that is specifically dedicated to getting the traction weight put on, and we'll talk about that more in depth later. What I described before is not meant to traumatize anyone or talk them out of doing the halo traction. I recognize the fact that I probably did not react the way that an average person would. I don't like saying that because I don't think that there should be any idea of like the fact that somebody else might not have reacted the way that you did, because you react the way you react. But I do know that I have a low pain tolerance, and that affected the way that the halo went on for me. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm saying that this was my experience, and it could be different for the next person who does it. I hope this video might help anyone who wants to know more about halo traction to have a good idea of what it's like to go through halo traction, or what it's like to get the halo on. Again, just to summarize, it's uncomfortable, it can be a lot of pain. It's definitely hard to sleep for the first couple weeks. That is one thing I will note just as a last minute thing, is that it is hard to sleep. So I'm taking a low dose of a sleeping pill now, and that helps. So if you're having trouble sleeping with the halo on, then definitely request a sleeping pill because it helps. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to comment or get in touch with me, then please check out the description below that has my social media pages and a link to my previous video on the whole experience. And feel free to comment, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos from me, and I will hopefully be making another one very soon. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a good week, and we will see you